Hello everyone, my name is Kethane, and I am here with Kerbal Space Program. The best space program. I really enjoy this game a lot and have played a considerable amount. And a lot of my friends say, you should probably, you're really good at this. I mean, you can't do half the crap you do. So I said, maybe I should put together a couple of videos so that other people might either see the crazy crap I get into, or maybe even learn a few things. So, mainly somewhat educational, somewhat entertaining. So, we'll see. I do not play stock, because while stock is fun, mods are more fun. And go through them quickly and briefly, hopefully. Here we are. That was quick and easy. So, going right down the list. What is this? Casify. What are you? Quantum Struts, yes. Quantum Struts is a very handy plugin, only adds two parts, a strut gun and quantum strut gun. What they do are basically detachable ray struts. They're very handy for docking ships. Not really so much for struts on on one vehicle, but mainly for connecting things for space stations and really large, conglomerations of vehicles. Taking a drink of tea. They're very handy for that. I'm using environmental visual enhancements, as you can see from Kerbal in the distance. It looks considerably more fancy. Also, there's those green dots. What is that? That is Kethane. I'll get into that in a minute. Crew transfer mod, very handy, very good. Basically any two docked ships, you can right-click and transfer Kerbals between any docked ship or even docked modules without having to send them outside on an EVA. Actually, I didn't even think about this. I could use them to put them from the command module into a science module. I didn't even think about that before. I'm derpy. Next on the list, Kerbal Engineering Redux. This is my bread and butter, and we're actually going to get started just so I can show you what it does, because honestly, it's really handy. That's my personal one, Molten Science. I actually can't use that anymore because I updated one of the plugins, and it kind of broke a lot of my stuff. So we're going to start fresh. I clicked the wrong button. Player name? Player name. No, that's not player name. That's a career name. Quiet you. Educational extravagance. Extravaganza. Extravaganza. And because I love Star Citizen and am part of Heimdall Security, look us up, I'm going to use the Aegis Dynamics flag, which has a picture of an Idris behind the Aegis logo. Because it's awesome. Anyone who disagrees will be shot. With the railgun. So let's go ahead and get started. I will have to restart KSP before I acquire and/or apply any science, because I'm using a KSP Interstellar. And every time I start a new campaign and load it, it says, hey, there's a tree update. Please update to the Interstellar tech tree is available. Install update. Changes to the tech tree have been applied. Please restart KSP before continuing. I will do so, but not just yet. For now, let's go into the VAB, which stands for Vehicle or Vertical Assembly Building. So load up us a command pod here, and go to Science. And these are the three parts that the Kerbal Engineering Redux adds. These two are basically the two halves of this. So I just use this and just say forget everything else. Kerbal Engineering Redux is very handy in that it gives you a lot of engineering and flight data, handy, almost essential to any sort of construction and orbital maneuver. Actually, I'm going to use a liquid rocket. There we go. So, decent efficiency? Yes. Doesn't have a big disparity. That's fine. Alright, so I've just assembled this rocket and put this little device on here. And we have this window down here. This is interesting. This is only a single stage rocket, and I actually can't make multi-stage rockets yet until I get some science, so I'm not going to bother with it. but each stage you add on will add another line and show you how much mass and total thrust that that particular stage has. From left to right, we have the cost. Cost is actually going to be a factor in the next update, so I read. They are working on budgeting and contract systems. You will apparently be able to earn money by doing contracts, and your rockets will cost money, so you will have to manage your budgets carefully. The mass, which is not immediately important, but it is important in calculating the thrust-to-weight ratio, which is a product of your thrust and your mass. Your ISP, which I forget exactly what it stands for, but it is in seconds, and it is your overall rocket's efficiency at delivering thrust for less fuel. The larger this number, the more efficient your rocket. Delta V, the total amount of change in velocity that your rocket can expel. It's really handy to know your delta V, even though you really don't care about, say, the actual, well, you do care about the actual number, but you don't have to go through any complex calculations. Generally, when you get a feel for it, say 2,500 meters per second is generally enough to get into a stable circular orbit around Kerbal. Thrust-to-weight ratio is very important. You generally want a launch vehicle to have greater than about, or have about or greater than 2 thrust-to-weight ratio. Time is the total amount of time that your stage will burn at maximum throttle. So that's handy to know too. Now TWR actually has 2 numbers, and we'll get more into detail on the mass and delta V and cost and all that. They have slashes on them. The left number is actually the value for the current stage, and the cost, and the right number is the value for all stages, including and above. So if I had another stage below this that was exactly the same, it would basically be double the mass, double the cost. It would have the same thrust and lower thrust-to-weight ratio because it would be lifting the stuff above it. But, you know, that's that. You can change all the reference bodies, and changing the reference bodies affects the thrust-to-weight ratio because even though your even though your mass stays constant, the thrust-to-weight ratio changes because the gravity differs. And gravity affects weight, but mass is constant. Technically speaking, with respect to gravity. Don't kill me. That's interesting. I didn't realize that Eve had a stronger gravity than Kerbal. Good to know. See, I'm learning stuff right now. I hope you are too. Gilly has a ridiculously small mass, so yeah, the thrust-to-weight ratio stands to reason that it's huge. I don't think anything else is that light, but yeah, Gilly is itty-bitty. Itty-bitty! It's basically an asteroid. I could probably land on it and grab it with a grabber and move it if it wasn't on rails. Anyway, this thing up here, I'll get into that in more detail later. That's a part of KSP Interstellar. But suffice it to say, I'll get into it later. Anyway, going down the list of mods from Kerbal Engineering, much more simple ones, I'll actually go to the launch pad and show you this one. Come on, baby. Let's do it. This is the Enhanced Navball. The Enhanced Navball, can't see it right now because I'm not launched, so let's launch. Whee! Whee! Alright, so we're going to orbit here. It actually gives you some interesting things. So we can see it here. Can I hear that? Man, that rocket motor's quiet. I'm used to dealing with, I have the volume on rocket engines turned down a lot. Because I like building big rockets, and big rockets make a lot of noise. So that's why you can't hear the rocket right now. This engine is also pretty quiet too. So as we can see on the nav ball right here, it's bigger than normal. I'll actually reset it to its normal stuff, and it's over on the side. This is our standard nav ball, but we have this indicator here, and we have these shadowed, ghosted indicators on either side here. These are ghosted velocity and anti-velocity indicators. You can barely see the anti-velocity one since it's over kind of on the other side, but it's basically indicating the direction that you have to turn to reach the velocity indicator. This also comes into play when you're setting up maneuvers, so that, say you're setting up a maneuver to go that way. The maneuver indicator will be right here. The ghosted maneuver indicator will be right here, telling you that you need to go around this axis to get to your maneuver indicator without having to spin around and hunt for it. So it's really handy. You can also change the horizontal position and the scale. I like a bit larger Navball so that I can actually see with some precision, and I like it kind of over on the side, a little bit out of the way. About right there. So that's enhanced Navball. I already went over environmental visual enhancements, which you can actually see right here in the clouds that we're going up into the clouds. I'm not doing my standard launch profile, but I'll get into that in a bit. Just going over my mods. Ion Hybrid Electric Pack. I like Ion Hybrid Electric Pack, but I use it with care. I had to tweak some of it to make it a bit more realistic and not quite so overpowered, but it does its job, and it's pretty good at it. It does require a considerable amount of energy to run the ion hybrid engines, which use a combination of xenon gas and standard liquid fuel and oxidizer to produce not quite ion engine efficiency, but about double standard engine efficiency. So not crazy, but good. What is this one? Oh, procedural fairings, which are a very neat one. I don't think it's anything more than visual, but it might affect aerodynamic qualities. But procedural fairings basically make it so that you don't need 800,000 fairing parts in order to have a good mod pack going. I basically can just go I also use NovaPunch, which I'll get into in a second, and removed all the fairing parts to clear up the memory, since I didn't need it with procedural fairings. Did I actually install an update? I'll have to look at that in a minute. Oh, I didn't. Yep, I'll have to get rid of that. It'll have to go. So when I restart, I'll get rid of the fairings in NovaPunch. Procedural fairings make a nice, you can either make it conic or eggshell, and you can either use structural fairings, which can be interstage, or jettisonable fairings, which are useful for parts that you don't, or like retrieving either either for aerodynamic protection of space vehicles or for structural support for, say, like a lander vehicle that you want to carry out as well. What else? What else? What else? That's a mission. The Kethane Pack. I'll get into that in a second. That's a little complicated. I'll cover KSP Interstellar and Kethane last. I guess the only other one before that is the TAC Fuel Balancer. There's one thing with the TAC Fuel Balancer that I find a little cheesy. This is the TAC Fuel Balancer. As you can see, it shows me my current status of my... Put that down low. It shows me the current status of my fuel tank. Now I can, if I had multiple fuel tanks on this, I could transfer from all connected fuel tanks into this one, transfer this out into all connected fuel tanks, balance its mass with all connected fuel tanks, percentage-wise, dump it, which would get rid of everything, like it just did, lock it so that nothing flows in or out, highlight it in case I'm not quite sure which fuel tank it is. As you can see, it's got a nice little blue glow there. And then if I really mess up something, or say I dumped it accidentally, or say, oh, you know what, I don't think I can do this while I'm flying, that's a problem. Huh. Interesting. Well, that's a problem then. Normally, either in space or landed, you can edit the fuel properties, but I'm going to crash and die here, So we'll just revert to launch and show you there. There we go, liquid fuel and oxidizer. See, now I'm landed and I can show you edit. When I'm actually flying atmospheric, this function isn't available. Edit, I can change this to a new value somewhere within the constraints of the fuel tank. So I can set it to 1. It has one kilogram of fuel. Or liter, whatever the volume units are, it doesn't actually specify. I think it's liter. Or I can say fill. So if I going through and mean to hit balance, but I accidentally dump it, oh noes! I didn't mean to dump it. Edit, fill, go back to, and it's still on dump, so it's dumping repeatedly. Now, this is more for errors, or even troubleshooting or debugging, whatever. I'm going to really try not to use it, and in fact I won't use it because it's also cheating. And we don't want to cheat for this. I'm going to show you guys how to do this without having to, so that you can launch stuff with stock parts and have fun in Kerbal, rather than having to scratch your heads and be all aggravated and annoyed with it, which I wager happens a lot with many people. So that's TAC Fuel Balancer. Last but not least, we have the Kethane Pack, which, if we go to the map here, you see all these interesting little hexes all over the place. By the way, Kerbal looks awesome with the enhanced visuals. It says resource info, Kethane node data. Every celestial body has Kethane deposits on it. Kethane is the Kerbal equivalent of methane, even though the KSP Interstellar adds methane and all sorts of various real-world stuff. Kethane is a magical gas that can be mined and converted into many other types of fuels. Liquid fuel, oxidizer, monopropellant, and xenon. Obviously at different ratios, but you know, yeah. It's very handy for like an orbital station. Usually I'll set up an orbital station in between the moon and Kerbal, so that vehicles that I set up to launch that need liquid fuel or oxidizer or whatever can launch, refuel, and then go about on their mission. And I'll send out a miner to mine up the materials and send it back to the orbital station to store it and reload it and all that fun stuff. It's pretty simple, but also kind of complicated, and I already have... Oh, that's a huge... Not touching that. That's bad story. That's a bad scene. We got some asteroids coming here. Interesting. Oh, and a tiny... That was way out there. Anyway. And last, but definitely not least, NovaPunch and Warp and KSP Interstellar. I keep calling it Warp plugin because that's the folder name. Sorry. NovaPunch focuses a lot on very big rockets. Some things like KNW rocketry may focus on other things. B9 Aerospace focuses on space planes. Unfortunately, I can't run all of them, so I had to pick one. And I chose NovaPunch because I like big rockets. I'll be honest. I love the Saturn V. It is a gorgeous machine, and it does its job fantastically. Especially when you're crazy like me. But KSP Interstellar focuses on faster than light travel. You might be saying, but there's a ton of warp warp mods out there that do that. KSP Interstellar does it, however, in a much more balanced way. It's such that... actually launch this just while we're waiting. It does it in a much more balanced way. It focuses on things like fusion power, fission, nuclear power, fusion power, antimatter. Can even make up like power satellites that can transmit power via microwave energy. But in all of these cases, you have to deal with heat. Your craft overheats, bad things can happen. Microwave receivers shut down, reactors overheat, and have to shut down or explode. You run out of power for your antimatter containment. Your antimatter containment explodes. You know, fun stuff like that. You know, because antimatter and normal matter don't mix well. They don't. They really don't. you shouldn't mix matter and antimatter. Bad things happen, unless you do it in a controlled manner inside a reactor vessel, in which case good things happen. You just have to be careful. We're flying through the clouds again. These aren't obviously very detailed clouds because I'm not using the Astronomer Visual Pack, which does precisely that. It makes them look very fancy and very awesome, but my KSP doesn't want to run it with all the other mods and plugins. I think I've covered all of that, and I'll probably cut it here in production and posting, and continue on after that. So, I will restart KSP. We'll leave the stream up in the meantime. Whee! And there's Jeb, happy as ever. Even though his rocket is spinning violently out of control. Oh, now it's spinning violently out of control. He's happy as can be.